right, we have a nice crowd here tonight on a chilly, rainy night, but are we excited?
Yay!
So we're in the final stretch, and you see the polls are neck and neck, and we see that Kamala's overall doing well, but it is up to the battleground states, of course. So general election polls don't mean much. You're going to see them go up and down. I read a lot about polling, and the pollsters say you got to look at trends, and in every given day things can change, depending on whoever they talk to. Now the other thing that I found out, which I thought was interesting, is that polls cannot take anything in account for turnout. So that's why if we get all these excited people, then there is a lot of youth. I mean, she's leading the young adult by 60 points in the Harvard poll, 60 points to 30 points in young adults. And so if we can push all these people to the polls, she's going to win because we're going to outnumber. And then the other thing is I'm seeing that the Senate races are starting to look a little better for us. Obviously, they're still in the margin of error, but because all these people now are going to be coming in, that helps too. So it just tells us every day, go do battle what you can in your local races, because that filters down from top down. So anyway, we don't want to wake up. This is what I always remember when I find myself getting excited. We all remember the day after the election, how we felt in 2016. So I'm cautiously optimistic. Anyway, okay, we're going to talk about the signs shortly. Kathy's going to announce that. So let's move to, and there are more signs. I should tell you, I've got limited signs on this. The St. Louis National Council of Jewish Women. You know where the resale shop is, their administrative office is there, in Lindbergh, they got tons of Yes on Free signs, and they're free. So if you have friends asking or whatever, that's where you can get them. Okay, Kathy. Oh, there you are. And I'm going to give you this, so you can announce this too. I remember it's free. I've got flyers on this.
Got the microphone.
Oh, okay. That's what you can do that. Yeah. Okay.
One sir. One sir.
As you know, we are not going to have a meeting in October, and we ask instead that you donate 15 hours of your time to your favorite candidates, or donate your time, talents, treasure, whatever to your favorite candidates in October. And so you can see the candidates' websites, of course, for how to do that, and tonight you're going to hear from a few of the candidates who are with us. We will, however, have a November meeting on Tuesday, November 26th. We're going to have an election debrief meeting, and our guest will be Dr. Anita Mannion, who is a professor of political science at UMSL. We've had her before. She's really an excellent speaker. So I wanted to tell you too, if you would like to see a sample of your own ballot that you will have whenever you vote, you can go to vote.org or to ballotpedia.org and then put in your address, and it'll pop right up exactly what your ballot will look like. And but be sure to be able to look at that, and also all of the issues that are there, all of the amendments and the issues. And we are not giving recommendations here tonight exactly how you should vote on those, We did want to say Amendment 3, of course, has been endorsed by the Missouri Democratic Party, and of course we hope and know everyone here has support on that. And there is, Maureen, can you help me with this Men for Choice
Sure.
advocacy?
Right, just talk to it. A very good friend of mine, who's very active, sent me an invitation. It's Men's for Choice, and it's a free event, and it's all about trying to get more men to be excited about reproductive rights. They have a special guest, Orrin Jacobson, the executive director of it's a formal organization, Men for Choice. She's got a beautiful home. You can come out, meet other like-minded men. You have to register to get the address, and if anybody's interested, I've got the flyer. Just pick one up here.
Thank you. Okay, and I wanted to remind everyone to watch the Hawley-Kuntz debate, or should I say the Kuntz-Hawley debate, that's Thursday, October 31st, and it will be on both KTVI and also KDNL, I believe, and at 7 p.m. And if you want to watch last Friday night's debate, I think you all heard about that Josh Hawley showed up unexpectedly at a debate where Lucas and the Libertarian and the Green Party guys were there, and he showed up unexpectedly, and I thought Lucas did a fantastic job with Hawley. If you want to see that, it's on YouTube under just Missouri Senate debate, Hawley-Kuntz spar over the issues. So,
We'll post it on our, we'll post it.
couple November 2nd, and I have a keyboard here where you can select. And the last thing is this Saturday at 11 a.m. we will have we are going to be at there near Walnut. About oh, thank you very much.
Here, we're going to let them do a little 2-minute update, and then we can get to our event. And I see Josh, where'd he go? Oh, there you are. I would like to pass the microphone around so that people can hear.
Hello, hi everyone. I'm Josh Saxton. Go up here so people don't have to turn around. I'm running for state rep in District 110, which is Wildwood. You know, we're not gonna win if we don't compete, and so that's one of the goals with my candidacy is that we need somebody to compete in Wildwood, somebody that wants to make things better for our neighbors. So that's what I'm doing. I've got literature in the back. If we haven't met, come up after the meeting. I'm happy to talk to you. But yeah, it's just really encouraging to see all of the folks that are out supporting Democrats and supporting change. So thanks a lot.
The microphone, you gotta have it real close. So Stacy?
Hi, I'm Stacy Molitor. I'm the campaign manager for Connie Steinmetz, who is in the 87th district, which is Maryland Heights and this little northeast part of Chesterfield. She can't be here tonight because we're ramping up for things. She's had a very full day, and she has a full day starting at, I think, 7 a.m. tomorrow, so I gave her the night off. We are doing really, really well. We just had a musical bingo fundraiser about a week and a half ago, and it was a real big success. Everybody had a good time. We are looking for people to be poll greeters for us on election day, especially in the middle of the day. We found that our the beginning of the day and end of the day slots are filling up wonderfully with our teacher friends because Connie is a retired teacher, but we need a lot of people in the middle of the day. So if you're interested, you can either go to conniesteinmetz.org or you can come see me, and I've got this cute little QR code that you can scan. And also you can go, that you can sign up to to canvas for her also. We canvas on Wednesdays and Sundays, and all of that good stuff. That's all I have. Thank you.
Hi, how y'all? I'm Jacqueline Cotton. Let me get up here. Like 100% cotton. You can see my signs. I'm running in District 101, which is in Chesterfield, almost all of Chesterfield, except for maybe a little tiny spot here, and a little tiny spot there. So things are going really well in my campaign. We're hitting everybody. We're knocking on doors. We're making phone calls. We're raising money and having a lot of fun while we're doing it. Things are going well. I'm getting a lot of good response from people that I talk with. A lot of interesting stories. I have a little on my social media. You might follow me. I have stories, canvassing with cotton stories of things I talk to, things I hear when I'm not knocking on doors with people. And like she was saying, help is required. So anybody that wants to help, come knock on doors for me and all of the candidates, especially here in Chesterfield, is hugely helpful to us. Making phone calls, working the polls, doing all those kind of things. We all need help with that. Of course, I know everybody's asking me the same thing. We're all kind of preaching to the group. But anything you guys can do to help, we have, how many days left? 42. 42 days. And we have to do everything we can to win. That's what I'm working on. And I hope y'all help me out. Thanks.
Okay. Melissa.
Don't get excited, I'm not running. Welcome me back, thank you. I'm here on behalf of Colin tonight. Colin Lovett, obviously running in the 100. Colin is doing something else tonight. He didn't even tell me what it was. So I just said, am I gonna see you tonight? He said, no. I said, okay, I'll do it for you. So I'm sure you all know about Colin because Colin and I ran together last time. Colin only lost by 181 votes. He's kicking ass right now. Taking names and kicking ass. He needs help too, obviously. They are working, all of them are working really hard to canvass, make phone calls, make these connections, raise money. They're doing a really good job working together, which Colin and I started doing last cycle, like starting canvassing together. Starting them out together so we could all meet together. And I see them all doing it now on Saturdays, and it's adorable, and you see the pictures of all of them out there together. So Saturday mornings, right, 10, is that what time you guys go? 10 o'clock on Saturdays, you guys can meet, where do y'all meet, at the Wolf?
At the Wolf.
At the Wolf, okay.
They meet at the Wolf. We meet at the Chesterfield office.
Okay, so Chesterfield office or at the Wolf, you can hit Jacqueline or Josh or Colin. You can donate to all or any of them. And by the way, I'm plugging the 3 of them, no offense to Connie, but my daughter works for all 3 of them, so I'm partial to the 3 of them. But we need 3. Last cycle, you heard me talking about we need 6 to flip. This time, if we can flip 3 seats, hold on to what we got, and flip 3, we break the supermajority. So this is what we need to do. It's Colin. I mean, he lost by 181, so it seems like that's the... And then we are at the table. They can't do the... Then we stop this nonsense here. We get control back in Missouri. Not complete control, but some control. So this is... I know we're all talking about Kamala, we're talking about Lucas, we're talking about all these things, but it matters right here, right now. So if you can't go out and canvass and you don't have time for that, then I beg you, I implore you to give these people money, and with 42 days of it. So just think about how often you can do it, please. Thank you.
So, the moment we've been waiting for. We all know about the evil banned books. We even have a week named for it now. So it was coincidental,
Yes.
perfect, that Jennifer is here. I'll just say a few words about her. Jennifer Nutefall is Dean of Libraries and Museums at St. Louis University. In this role, she leads and manages the main library, the medical center library, and 3 museums on campus. Prior to St. Louis University, she was Dean of University Hospitals. Libraries, sorry, too many hospitals on one line. At the University of Northern Colorado, and University Librarian at Santa Clara University in Santa Clara, California. How you ended up here, isn't it? Oh my goodness, what a change. Anyway, Jennifer is originally from Buffalo, New York, and she's been a librarian for 26 years. She holds a BS in journalism and an MLS, that's a Master's of Library Science, from Syracuse University, and a Master of Arts in Education and Human Development from George Washington University. Welcome.
Thank you all so much. I did just want to start on a non-banned book related topic, which is Missouri executed a man tonight. So Marcellus Williams has passed, and it's one of those things that makes me question a little bit why I ended up moving to Missouri. I will say that, I live in the city. I moved here in the fall of 2022 for my job. And I am enjoying this community. I will say I have some questions about the state, but I'm very grateful to be invited to speak tonight about an issue that is of utmost importance, not only to librarians, but I think to everyone. And that's what's happening with the banning of books. So I do just want to give the caveat that I am speaking here tonight in my role as a private citizen and not as a representative of SLU. So I'm going to try to manage a somewhat slightly awkward thing. So this is National Banned Books Week, so it was actually really well that we postponed this to coincide with this week. So Banned Books Week started in 1982 in response to a sudden surge then in the number of challenges to books in libraries, bookstores, and schools. And so this annual event highlights the value of free and open access to information and brings together the entire book community in shared support of the freedom to speak and express ideas. And so this is this year's theme, which is Freed Between the Lines. So wear some swag today. It usually is towards the end of September or early October every year. The week does switch a little bit. So what I want to do tonight is give a big picture and then narrow in and focus on some things that are happening in Missouri. Just because I think we know more of what's happening in our own state. We've heard a couple of things nationally, but there might be more that's happening there than you are potentially aware of. So I do want to give credit to two organizations that gather information on this and provided a lot of context and information for my talk tonight. So ALA, the American Library Association's Office of Intellectual Freedom, and then PEN America. So just briefly about both of those organizations. The Office of Intellectual Freedom was established in 1967 and is charged with implementing ALA policies concerning the concept of intellectual freedom as embodied in the Library Bill of Rights, which is my association's basic policy on free access to libraries and library materials. So their goal is to educate librarians and the general public about the nature and importance of intellectual freedom in libraries. And then PEN America was founded in 1922 and stands at the intersection of literature and human rights to protect free expression in the United States and worldwide. So PEN America has been doing really great work on this, as you'll hear as we go throughout tonight. I almost wish I could turn this podium around.
Yes.
So what I wanted to get started with is what I think people don't always understand about the professional work of librarians, which is how do materials even get into libraries? So I want to start there and then also use a local example from where I live in the city. So, this is not a random thing that we do. So libraries have different user communities. So public libraries, school libraries, academic libraries, we are with the population we serve. And so we have collection development policies that help guide the materials that we select for our specific user community. And so what I put up here, and then have the link to as well, is the policy for the St. Louis Public Library in the city. So city president, seemed a nice way for me to kind of connect that. So what the policy essentially ends up saying is, what are the types of things that they want to collect? So this is for books, for the e-resources, for ebooks, all of those things that you can get, streaming media, audiobooks. So it lists out what's the criteria for that, but also what's not selected. So I have a printout of these, poor trees, but so the proud and diverse city, but the criteria is developed and reviewed regularly by a committee that they had in the city, and they have a list of things. They also list what they don't collect. So materials intended for professionals. So if you're a medical professional or a legal professional, engineering, so they don't really collect materials in that, because for a public library, that's not really their audience. That's why there's medical libraries, law libraries, academic libraries. They don't collect materials in outdated formats, self-published textbooks, usually that sort of thing. Then they also talk about gifts and then how materials are deselected or removed from the collection. What the policies also do is talk about how you can do a request for reconsideration. And so this is what I feel a lot of what is happening really overlooks. Libraries already have ways, if someone is not sure a book might be the right fit for their library, a way to say, could you reconsider this? And so the city spells this out, the city libraries pretty specifically, and first of all, who is allowed to submit a request for reconsideration? So for the city library, city residents. So someone from the county, can't be like, hey, wait a second, I don't like what you have there. And then they have a form to use, and then they have some guidelines. Form has to be complete, that makes sense. But also that during the review period, the material in question will remain available to the public. Because again, what people are looking for is to get things removed. So I just want that sort of common understanding of what's coming up is something that libraries already do and have a practice in place. It might look different if you're a school library than a public library, but there's a process there and it is written down and documented. So now I want to just turn briefly and just with a little bit of language. So Emily Knox, who's a professor in the School of Information Studies at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, she was on a recent webinar talking about banned books. And she said there's basically 4 things that can happen to a book. And this made sense to me, but also was in a way I hadn't thought about it before. So redacted. So that's when words or ideas are marked over or covered in a book. So you're literally trying to scratch them away. Restricted is when it's moved, so someone needs to ask for it. So we've moved that book behind the desk. You have to ask the librarian for it. Relocated is when a book is moved to a section that isn't the author's intended audience. So moving, say, a teen or children's book to the adult section. That wasn't the author's intended audience for that. And then removed is the outcome of a challenge. So when a book is actually physically removed from the collection. So those are different things that can happen to the books and what people are trying to do with them. So book banning isn't new. Banned book weeks exist for a reason. I feel it kind of ebbs and flows a little bit. National Geographic actually has a really great story on the history of book banning, but it goes all the way back to religious, trying to ban books, back when we were separating from Great Britain and the colonies. In the 1850s, multiple states had outlawed expressions of anti-slavery sentiments. In the mid-20th century, school libraries became sites of contentious battles again. And not surprisingly, that was around race and religion and many of the same themes that we're seeing today. In the Jim Crow era South, the United Daughters of the Confederacy made several successful attempts to ban school textbooks that didn't offer a sympathetic view of the South lost in the Civil War. One thing I learned as I was putting this together is that there were attempts to ban a book called The Rabbit's Wedding, which is a 1954 children's book that depicted a white rabbit marrying a black rabbit because opponents felt it encouraged interracial relationships. Or rabbits, I had no idea what's happening. And so these attempted bans can also just have a chilling effect on librarians in terms of what they decide or not decide to order for the collection. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot now too in many states, of librarians saying, maybe I don't want to get that book that my community might love because of how someone might perceive that or challenge. So it's that self-censorship that I think is also an issue with this. There's also been in the past a rash of challenges around books like Huckleberry Finn, Catcher in the Rye, To Kill a Mockingbird, The Canterbury Tales. The Blue Sky is still one that we see quite frequently. One thing I found interesting, and I'm curious how this will play out in some of the court cases, but in 1982, the Supreme Court addressed in a case where involving a group of students who sued a New York school board for removing books by authors like Kurt Vonnegut and Langston Hughes, that the board had deemed anti-American, anti-Christian, anti-Semitic, and just plain filthy. So what the Supreme Court in 1982 said was that local school boards may not remove books from school libraries simply because they dislike the ideas contained in these books, citing students' First Amendment rights. So I'm curious, the case is Island Trees Union Free School District versus Pico. And so what PEN America calls at the time we're in now, they refer to it as educational gag orders. So what I want to do is show you some stats and what the current situation is before talking about some laws in specific states, some lawsuits that are happening, and then again, taking a look at Missouri. So these are from the Office of Intellectual Freedom at the American Library Association. So last year, 23, the number of titles targeted for censorship at public libraries increased 92%. While school libraries saw an 11% increase. And we had posters made up last year. We do a banned book display. So it's kind of interesting to see how things have shifted just even in 1 year. The number of unique titles challenged between 21 and 23, you can see that sharp rise from 1858 to 4240. In what I think will not shock any of us, almost the majority of titles that have been targeted for censorship represent the voices and lived experiences of minoritized communities. And then more than 100 titles were challenged in 17 different states, and we can see Missouri is on that list. I mean, Texas, I'm almost not going to talk about Texas and Florida because I feel like everybody knows what's happening in Texas and Florida. It's some of the stuff that's happening in other states. So then this, which I need to look at my own slide to read a little bit better. So this again is from the Office of Intellectual Freedom, OIF. So on the far left, it's talking about who's initiating these challenges. And the largest percentage is patrons, so I think of that as patrons of the community that the library represents. Parents, and then pressure groups makes up that. And then below that, it's board, teachers, elected officials, and others. Where are the attempts taking place? Public libraries are still the majority, but school libraries following up that close second. And then they're not just challenging books. There's other things listed here. So the second one is actually displays. So libraries of all kinds do a lot of displays. There's many heritage recognition months. So maybe someone comes in and says, I don't like your pride display, or I don't like that you're acknowledging this, you need to take that down. And then the top 10, the sad top 10. So this, from the OAF, lists not only the books that have been most frequently challenged, but the reasons that people give for it. And if you can read that tiny print, your eyes are much better than mine. But Genderqueer, which is a graphic novel of a teenager struggling with their gender identity, has been #1 for a couple years. The reasons are that it's LGBTQIA content and then claimed to be sexually explicit. All boys aren't blue, LGBTQIA claimed to be sexually explicit. This book is gay, LGBTQ content claimed to be sexually explicit, sex education, perks of being a wallflower, flamer. So there's this constant claim of being sexually explicit. The Blue Sky, Toni Morrison, has carried over for a number of years. There's a couple new ones on here that were not there last year. Again, I guess congratulations to them. Let's Talk About It is a newer one that has popped up, which is a guide, an appropriately, I will say I haven't seen it because it's not my demographic for where I work, but an appropriately done book for sex education. So claimed to be sexually explicit, sex education, LGBTQIA content, and then Soul, which is a particular story in focus of someone's experience. So, claimed to be sexually explicit and rape. So those are the top 10 from last year. And so if you just take a minute and think, what do they all seem to have in common for the most part? They're claimed to be sexually explicit, and the majority of them LGBTQIA. So I would say a couple things is, what are people saying is sexually explicit? And then why are not stories of those that have experienced discrimination and come from a minority community, why aren't those being valued? All right, so as you sort of ponder that, I get to now talk about the fun stuff of what other states are doing. So the New York Times had this piece in July, and I've supplemented that a little bit. But let me just see, does anybody know what's happening in Idaho? Oh, Idaho.
I don't imagine.
So, Idaho. So the law that they passed there allows parents or guardians to file complaints about material they deem inappropriate, which is a term they left undefined, for minors, and requires schools or public libraries to relocate the material where minors can't access it. Parents or guardians who report violations would receive monetary damages if a library fails to comply. As a result of this new law, some small libraries in Idaho are becoming adults only because they don't have the space to separate out in the manner that the law is describing for their collection. So there's stories with, your one-room small public library that there's signs outside, like 18 and over, essentially. So then there's Utah, because, let's have a competition. So the Utah governor signed a bill expanding on a 2022 law that allows parents to challenge books in schools, making it easier to prohibit criminally indecent or pornographic books statewide if they're banned in a handful of school districts or charter schools. So traditionally, schools have been allowed to take into consideration whether a book has artistic merit or would otherwise be valuable to students. So what they've done is that if the same material is removed by 3 school districts, or 2 school districts and 5 charter schools, the State Board of Education is going to order it to be removed statewide. And so far, 13 books have been banned from all public schools. In South Carolina, the state education department has said that their new regulations are an effort to create a uniform process to replace a patchwork approach to challenging books and deciding whether they're appropriate. Under the new rules, which went into effect in June, districts are required to keep a list of all books and materials available to students, and there will be one statewide form for lodging complaints about the books. I just have to say as a side note, libraries have a place where all of our books, you can find them, and it's called a catalog, which is why we have it. So anyway, back to South Carolina. According to the rule, the materials cannot include any depiction of sexual conduct, regardless of the grade level they're intended for. Districts can decide whether they want to comb through their collections and remove anything that would contravene the rule, or apply the standard to new purchases going forward and address any challenges as they arise. So that gets a little bit to that self-censorship that librarians might have of really questioning, should I get this book for the collection or not? In Tennessee, an amendment to an existing law went into effect July 1st, codifies the definition of what books and library materials are suitable for children in kindergarten through 12th grade. It says material that includes any descriptions or depictions of sexual conduct, sexual excitement, excess violence, or sadomasochistic abuse, which once again are not in books, kind of ever or for that age range, but can't be part of a school library's collection. When a book is challenged, the local education agency has 60 days to decide whether it's appropriate. If they don't make a decision, the concerns can be brought to a state commission, and if that commission decides it should be removed, it has to be removed statewide. And then Alabama. So public libraries in Alabama are under recent guidelines from the Alabama Public Library Services at the directive of the governor, that some public libraries are changing so that no one under the age of 18 will be able to check out any book, video, or other form from the local library unless a parent or guardian is present to okay the transaction, or a signed consent form is on file that gives the child permission to borrow any item available for checkout. Although there is no actual mandate, the threat lingers that state funding will be cut to any Alabama library that does not meet the new guidelines. So you can see that there is these varying approaches in states of what's happening. And again, I would say very much a misunderstanding of the types of materials that school libraries have, and then public libraries that again serve their community. And there was one, I'll talk about an upcoming program that is coming up at the end of October at the end, but it's like Puppies for Pride, I think is the book or something like that. And people are challenging that because, again, of the pride, like the things that they're finding to challenge books about. You might remember, it's a Tango Mix 3 about the 2 gay penguins at the zoo, and just these very straightforward things that are written for children, and people are both very much taking it out of context and think that it's saying something that it's not. So on the good news side, there has been some lawsuits about this, and this is where PEN America in particular, I think, has been doing some really good work along with the ACLU. So I'm just gonna highlight 2, which actually both happened to me in Florida, but there are other lawsuits that have been taking place in Texas, Iowa, Arkansas, and Alaska, which I found a very surprising place for this to happen for some reason. So in May of last year, so in May of 23, PEN America, along with Penguin Random House and a diverse group of authors, joined with parents and students in Escambria County, Florida, to file a federal lawsuit challenging removals and restrictions of books from school libraries that violate their rights to free speech and intellectual equal protection under the law. So the lawsuit brings together authors whose books have been removed or restricted, and parents and students in the district who cannot access the books in what it was called a groundbreaking challenge to unlawful censorship. So that is still making its way through. Interestingly, in that case, in January, when it went before the judge, they heard oral arguments on the school district's motion to dismiss. So in an unexpected order from the bench, the judge denied the school district's motion to dismiss on the First Amendment claims, finding standing for all plaintiffs and rejecting the school district's argument that the book removal constituted government speech not subject to First Amendment scrutiny. So the judge dismissed the claim that the removals also violated the Equal Protection Clause, so that case is going forward. And then in another lawsuit that was actually just filed earlier this month, so the 6 major publishers that are listed up there, the Authors Guild and several best-selling authors have teamed up with students and parents, again in Florida, to file a federal lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of 2 provisions of one of the state's recently enacted laws. It argues that it's vague and overbroad and led to the improper removal of hundreds of books from school and classroom libraries in the state. The law allows anyone in the district to object to material in the classroom or school library. If it is not permanent removal. So I think what has been nice for me to see is the work of the publishers about this. Authors are pissed. Like John Green, his books have been challenged and he's been very vocal about that. One of the spoken against that. Some people might say it brings some books to visibility that they might not have otherwise, but that's not what these authors are looking for. They want people to read their books because they're good books. In a brief bit of good news before I get to what's happening in Missouri, which is maybe not the best news. So there are a couple states that have passed laws specifically against book bans, basically saying you can't ban books. So Illinois was one of those that got some coverage here. Minnesota and Maryland also passed similar laws. So in Minnesota, the law prohibits the banning or removal of a book or other material based solely on its viewpoint or the messages, ideas, or opinions it conveys. It allows challenges to continue. There should be a reconsideration policy in libraries. I think that is just something that we would expect, but mandates that trained and licensed librarians be part of that process. So it really, again, just sort of reinforces I would say our expertise and our involvement in that process. So the other 2 laws are similar to that. And then Missouri. So again, I moved here in August of 22. So, and as an academic, some of the specific things that are happening to my school and public library colleagues, don't maybe have a direct impact on me, but it's a profession. To me, it's us as a profession, how our expertise is being challenged, assumptions people make, and I'll get into some of the personal stories as well. But in Missouri, there's SB 775, which potentially you might know a little more about than I do, but it was passed in August of 22. The bill defines explicit sexual material as any visual depictions or acts with sex and genitalia. Materials that are exempt includes those that have serious artistic significance, works of anthropological significance, or materials used in science courses. Violations of the law are a Class A misdemeanor, resulting in a year in jail and a $2,000 fine. So librarians could be fined $2,000. So the ACLU of Missouri filed a lawsuit in Jackson County on behalf of the Missouri Association of School Librarians and the Missouri Library Association challenging this government censorship law that has caused school districts across the state to remove hundreds of titles from their shelves. I'm just dropping things randomly. Missouri also passed a revised statute in that session, which removes not only professional librarians, but also from parents in the decision as to what's appropriate for their students and children. The law, and this I will say is from the ACLU website about this lawsuit, the law creates fear through the threat of arbitrary enforcement, of imprisonment, or fines, leaving school districts faced with the ostensible legal dilemma of protecting their staff against potential persecution or upholding the students' First Amendment rights. So there was also a lawsuit they filed challenging book bans and automatic removal policies in Wentzville, an independent school district. And in Wentzville, the lawsuit led to the return of 7 of 8 books to the library shelves. The independent school board, that lawsuit I believe is still pending. But you can see the quote from the school librarian in Missouri here, you second guess everything that you're purchasing, again, so you wind up not, you're self-censoring because you're fearful. And the thought of being both fined and jailed for doing your job is not a great way to go to work. So one thing that I think is helpful to know is, especially for public library boards, how some of this works. So I taught a graduate library science course for Syracuse University this summer. One of those class sessions was on governing boards, and I brought in a colleague of mine because I don't report to a board. That's not my particular area of expertise. And she happens to be in Christian County. She's Renee Brummett, who's the director of the Christian County Public Library System there. So just briefly, if you don't know, but state statute sets library board membership, and it breaks it down a couple different ways. But public library boards have significant amount of authority on this, so I think it's helpful to know who is on the public library board in your areas, which would probably mainly be the county and the city. So if you haven't heard what's happening in Christian County, so first what they did is they changed the way that new members are appointed. So the library now has new board members who want to label LGBTQ material, and what they say is overhauling the library system. So in their board meeting last month in August, this new slate of officers were elected to lead the board, and they directed the director to look into subject headings that would fall under the LGBTQ umbrella for library materials and develop options that could be used to label those materials. So when the change was made in Christian County, it went to those appointments to the library board. So people are challenging what was happening in Christian County because they only applied it to membership of the library board and not to other boards in the county. So there's a number of local articles about that if you want to read a little bit more. Their meetings are recorded and minutes are available if you need to see what is more happening there, which is very unfortunate. And then for public libraries, especially for a place like that, the directors serve under the board. So your job potentially could be at risk from month to month. And that's a very difficult position for individuals, to be. So I'm gonna pause there for a brief second. So what I have is a slide with some information on how to become an advocate. So I have totally bummed you out for the last, 30 minutes or something like that. So try to leave with maybe a little bit of good news, and then talk about a program that we're participating in at the end of October. So everybody gather your breath. Okay, So thanks to PEN America, which again does fabulous work on this, so don't think this was me just putting this all together. One of the best things that you can do to support your libraries, but I would also say really your librarians, is to show up. And so what PEN America talks about is going to meetings, and how important that is. And so they said there's some logistics that you need to know. When is the public library board meeting? What about, do they allow public comments? How is that listed on the agenda? How long do people have to speak? Do you have to register? Are there rules for that comments period? So is something happening in your local public library area that you would like to leave a comment for? And if books are being challenged, maybe not surprisingly, the first thing to do is just read the whole book. So often what is happening is that people are taking a snippet or a section of the book and not putting it in context, which then, you could do that to probably almost any book, and any book would not come off well. And what happens is when you read the whole thing and see where it is in context. It's helpful to understand what about the book is making it a target for restriction or removal. Based on tonight, you can probably guess it's one of 3 things. If that's happening here, it's probably happened somewhere else. So you can look at how else have communities, individuals pushed back on that, and what's been the outcome of those challenges. And then I think most importantly, it's the making it personal. So why does something like this matter to you? How does it affect you if you have children, your community? So it's not some amorphous, I'm standing up because this is the right thing to do, but here is why it's important to me. So this upcoming program, I went to dinner at the very nice Joey B's recommendation that Maureen gave me, and I'm currently reading the book That Librarian by Amanda Jones. So Amanda Jones is in Louisiana. She's a school librarian. It's in the same place that she grew up. So she has lived there her whole life, married, children, churchgoer, and she heard at a library board meeting that they were going to be challenging some of the books in the public library. They didn't list any names, but she went and she spoke for the inclusion of materials that represent the diverse section of their community. And there is a group in Louisiana that was there at that meeting, picked up on her comment, and then basically targeted her for constant harassment. She talks about the impact of being called a groomer and a pedophile, what that does to your reputation, people who have known you your whole life that stop speaking to you. She doesn't go to church anymore. It's led to issues, in her community. She still has her job at the school library. She talks about why that's important, other people that she's talked to that have been in similar places. But one thing that she has done is she filed a lawsuit against those individuals for defamation. So that is part of what her story is. So I'm not quite finished with it yet, but the impact personally of what's happening to people is significant. So she is on a book promotion tour, which she's only available on weekends because she still does have her job. So along with SLU, WashU, and the City Library, we're bringing her in conversation with Tom Bober, who, when he was president of the Missouri Association of School Librarians, he is part of that ACLU lawsuit against the state. And Jennifer Buehler, who's an associate professor in the School of Education at SLU, who has done research on Judy Blume, teaches young adult literature in the School of Education. She wrote an op-ed in the Times-Dispatch last year about the impact of book bans. So that should be a really excellent conversation. There's a registration link. I will send that information to Maureen afterwards to get that out. It's going to be on WashU's campus. There is free parking, so It is actually pretty easy to get there, even though it's not, it'll be new to me too, but 3 to 5, they'll have books for sale there. Amanda will do a signing afterwards. We're planning for it to be about a 75 to 90 minute program with time for questions and gathering after. And then what I did, because I'm a librarian, I put in some resources. So if you want to get more of an idea of what is happening on the national scale, again, I cannot recommend enough PEN America and the Office of Intellectual Freedom. They really are the two main places that are focusing on this. Every library has a legislation tracker, so it has a map of the US, so you can take a look state by state to see what's happening. So if you're not in your home state, or if you want to see what else might be flying under the radar here in Missouri, that might be one way to do it. And then I believe it's every library started their organization Fight for the First, which is their advocacy arm that they spun off. And then there's a Good Publishers Weekly piece on the case against book bans. And then I will say I'm a big podcast listener. I'm sure it shocks no one that I listen to a lot of NPR. But Code Switch did a series on book bans. One was looking at interviewing the author of the book Flamer, which is about a young male and his realization that he's gay. And then also how book bans affect indigenous literature, and then also the Consider This podcast had a replay of It's Been a Minute on banned books. So that's just a sampling. There's a lot more options out there. This is a really difficult time for librarians, and I will say that it's not just impacting red states. I was in a webinar earlier this year, and a school librarian from a library in New Jersey, and you think New Jersey, right? There's your lovely blue bastion of the Northeast, and she's been targeted, and talks about going on anxiety medication, developing depression, having to see a therapist, the real personal impact that it has, and for school librarians, what kind of support they might receive from other teachers in the district. The school principal or the district itself has an impact on them, but she's still going back to school every day because she believes in what she's doing and the environment that she's creating for kids. I've been a librarian my whole career. I started working in libraries since I was 16. I can't imagine my life without libraries. And it's been a real sea change in publishing from especially young adult books, which saw all of us in this room reflected, to books that show the variety and different types of experiences of people out there. And I just really hope that we don't go back and they don't see themselves anymore in books. So
We're not going back.
we are not. Yes.
Because when we fight.
When we fight, we win. Thank you, Kamala. So I feel like I'm able to give these kinds of presentations because I am at a different kind of library. And also, even though this is me in my private citizenship, SLU is a Jesuit university. We believe in social justice. That's something I personally also believe in. So if I can bring some more insight into this. So I appreciate the invitation to come talk, and I can try to answer if you have questions.
Great. Wow. I can tell you all these primaries and the school board elections, and there was a slate of really awful people running for school board, and they all lost.
Oh, good.
So we're making progress, but that was celebrated by all of us. So I'm going to bring remember to put it up to your mouth so that you can ask questions and be heard.
I feel like I sprinted through that presentation, sorry.
No.
You did great. It was very informative. Thank you for sharing all that with us. I'm curious as to how many religious texts are banned.
Like the Bible.
Yeah, I mean, again,
I was trying to spread it around, but yeah, absolutely.
Did you
the
challenge
Bible.
that one?
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because that is what some people, start to do to sort of show some of the hypocrisy of it, of, you're saying these things about these books, but, what about the Bible or other texts, which is certainly one way to go. When I lived in Colorado, I was in a very conservative part of Colorado, which was also hard after California, I will say. And the public library director there, when I talked to him about it, his response was, when someone would come in saying, I don't like that you have X book, he would say, there's a reason, we want the library to be for everyone. What books don't we have that you would like to see? So that's how he was trying to balance that community there of not, I'm gonna take this book away because you don't like it, but is there something else you would like us to add to the collection that would maybe be a good representation of your viewpoint? And that seemed to work for him because I was there a short period of time, but that particular library wasn't in the news there. So that was another way potentially to try to balance that.
So there aren't any religious texts that are banned?
Not to my knowledge, and not according to what I found.
Sort of to that same vein, it seems to me that this is just another attempt at control, right? This is no different than the abortion bans. This is no different than any other means of control where we control whether or not gay people are allowed to be married, or this is all the same thing. This is just one more way we're going to control people. So, to me, just like she said about the Bible, I mean, these same people have no issue with pornography being sold, right? So the hypocrisy, I mean, to me it is always fascinating that these people who, by the way, think that we should have smaller government are always so fascinated with being very busy making lots of rules about governing the rest of us. So that's interesting to me. I also think it's always interesting how busy they are making rules when they're not the experts, right?
Yes.
I'm a math teacher, so I get where you're coming from. I have not been a public school teacher in many years because of what they've done in public schools. So I think it's what you just said about what he did in Colorado it's the carrot versus the stick. And I think, that's a personal choice, right? What he chose to do, but we're facing this on a national level, and certainly what Kamal is trying to do with Joy, right? Until though we all sort of get on board with that and we make this a blue wave and we sort of change the entire dynamic, right now we are in a place where half the country wants the carrot and half the country wants the stick, and little pockets of that, we're not going to get there. That's really our problem, is that we're still going to continue to fight this battle. And I'm with you. I'm on the carrot side, but
yeah, and I think what's interesting too
that was
is
a question. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. It's perfectly fine for a parent to say to their, you are my child, I'm gonna see what you're checking out. I don't approve that you check out
Right,
this
and
book.
you don't
That
have
is
to
that
do it.
parental decision to make.
Right, and then you don't have to do it.
Right,
You
right.
cannot buy the pornography, and you don't have to have the abortion, and you don't have to do those things. They're in
Right,
the book.
and
That's called choice.
Yes, and so I think that the thing that they don't see is, obviously when a book then would ultimately be removed, or that's what they're trying to do, it's taking away the choice from everyone. So it's saying what I feel or believe about, in this case, this book, supersedes any rights that you might have, to read that book.
It's my same feeling about guns when everybody's need to have a gun and kill people is more important than my ability to live.
Yes.
The same thing. It's all about control, and it makes me crazy. Sorry.
Yes, agreed.
You get to go. I can go on for a while.
So I am a former public school elementary teacher,
Oh,
reading
yay.
specialist. My first job was as a page in my public library, so I'm your people. My question kind of along those lines, does Penn America work with people who are challenging challenges to school curriculum? Not just libraries, because I know it's not just what they have in their libraries, but it's what they're teaching in, for example, their high school English classes.
Right.
Or even, as you start to integrate more diversity into your elementary school curriculum and the books that come with that also, do they get involved with that?
I don't think so, but it would be worth, so when you go to their website, they have a couple different sections, so they have a whole section on book bans and all of their work they've done on that. They have a couple ones that are the issues they focus on. Obviously, this is the one that I've been looking at the most. So it's at least worth a look at that. The ALA Office of Intellectual Freedom, what they do is assist specifically librarians. So they both gather complaints and challenges, which is how they track those statistics, which, like many things when it's self-reported, there's probably a number that aren't included in that. But yeah, that's interesting because, so I lived in DC for a while too. I really moved around the country. I want to stay here for a while. My sister and the family are in Rochester. It's close. I'm not used to the humidity again yet though. But the Washington Post, which I still subscribe to, there were those couple teachers, I think maybe in Kentucky, Tennessee, like that sort of region of the country where the students in those classes were like reporting the teachers for the books that they were reading in class, and the teachers were getting reprimanded. I think one ended up either being fired or left, for that sort of thing. Like how dare you are making us as white students, feel bad because you're telling us the truth about history, that sort of thing.
This is a heavy topic.
It is.
And it's hard sometimes to feel like, are there things that I can do? What are the little things I can do?
Mm-hmm.
I know someone who thought of that. Tim Walz, he became the governor of Minnesota. The first week that he was governor, put in a little free library in front of the governor's mansion and filled it with banned books.
Tim Walz.
He also passed that law. That little
Yeah.
There's another one in front of the Capitol now, the same.
I love Tim.
I wanted to just make sure that we all recognize the fact that one of the book bans was how it affected Indigenous literature.
Yes.
That I feel is often overlooked.
Yes.
Actually, I often think of Indigenous issues, but never crossed my mind that would be one included. And I think that's something we all need to remember when we're talking about especially here in the Midwest, because we have a lot of people that are affected, especially like Kansas has a whole area.
Yes. Yeah, I have to say that if you're not a podcast listener, or if you are, I definitely recommend Code Switch. So it deals with, all sorts of, racial issues and topics. Like the short one they have an occasional Ask Code Switch episode. So it was, do bike lanes increase gentrification was the question that someone wrote in to ask. And then it was just like a 12 or 15 minute discussion about that. So I, as someone who grew up, in a suburb of Buffalo, where it was like, the things that you assume about a city, it was like we were in Amherst, you didn't go into Buffalo. And so much that I did not learn in school. So I find this for myself just very self-educating. And then also, as a way to try to get a better understanding of other points of view. But it was great that they included that in this series.
Any other questions? Steps in tonight.
You mentioned self-censorship. Is the OAF doing anything to try to measure the degree to which that's impacting? I'm a public school teacher in Missouri, and we are seeing self-censorship of everything from classroom libraries, school libraries, curriculum, and it's an insidious problem, and I just wondered if the OIF is doing anything to try to measure the degree to which that's happening. The book bans themselves tend to be more public, it's easier to fight.
Yes, yeah, that's a really good question. Again, just from what I've seen, because it's not that active challenge, I think that's what most librarians go to the OIF for, how do I try to respond when so like what was happening, and probably still is in Florida, where after one of the many laws that got passed there, and librarians and teachers were just removing all the books from their school shelves, just sort of preemptively. It's another example of that. So there was like media coverage of that, but on these smaller individual cases, I don't think people are reporting it, and I do think you're right. It's missing that segment of what's happening and the impact of that. So I would say for if something is happening for a librarian out there, that is worth a call to OIF to see how they might be able to assist with that.
Getting a little bit away from libraries and more back into schools and curriculum here, and I realize it may not be your area of expertise, but I will still raise my question. What about to the extent that kids who are doing projects that they have to either report on, do displays or whatever, are you aware of limitations where maybe kids are doing projects that their parents have supported or their families have supported, but they might not be supported by the community or the school because of some of these policies? Any insight?
I mean, that is also a really great question. Unfortunately, I don't have any insight on that. I think one of the things that, I'll just connect this to something that is maybe vaguely related, that's harder. So say, in that Idaho town that had that small one-room public library where it had to become 18 or older, what's happening then for those children in that school system, which I'm assuming is also smaller, that probably that librarian has either challenges or, so it's like what has become, like how narrow a set of resources has that become for that child/children to potentially try to do some of, their research on whatever topic it might be. Now, of course, this also maybe is the time for me to just say, there is this thing called the internet, which people can also go to. So there is something for me where, again, it's one thing for you to say, like, I don't want my child to read this book. That's perfectly fine. But they also have probably this thing in their pocket that sometimes I feel like is attached to my hand, that they might be able to get all sorts of stuff from too. So it's a really, part of me is like, why books? But then the stories that books convey, the history they tell, the information that they have, they want to try to limit that and make that a much narrower world. So I don't know in particular, but I worry about those places where that wider breadth of information might not be available.
I have a question. The other day, you probably saw the article in the Post-Dispatch about that children are reading less and having summaries of things and rather than.
We're struggling with that in higher ed too.
I'm sorry.
We're struggling with the reading part in higher ed too.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I never read a Cliff Note, but I mean, I think most of them I read to try to, if I was writing a paper to find a theme or something like that. But I'm just wondering where that's coming from, who's initiating it? Does it go back and forth and the kids don't want to, versus schools are afraid to assign something that won't be followed? Any thoughts on that dynamic?
So the only Cliff Notes I will admit to is Moby Dick. I just could not. I was in AP English, that book, and I watched the Last of the Mohicans movie. So that is how I got through those two books. So I think the thing for me as a single childless cat lady, so it has been a long time since I've been in school. I think there's a couple things. One is that there seems to be a somewhat widespread attitude that graphic novels aren't books or that graphic novels aren't reading. And that to me is completely false. Or if you listen to audiobooks, that's not reading either. It's like, it's a book that someone is reading to you. So I would maybe say, depending on who you're talking to, like make sure that those couple things, they're not thinking that. And then, I think of some of the books that I read when I was in high school, which was a while ago. Those aren't always the most engaging books for that age group, which is why public libraries, I read so much. And and the diversification of literature there. So potentially maybe reasons why some children are reading less is they haven't found the thing that's turned them on to reading yet. They haven't found what interests them. It might not be that classic literature, maybe they like the mystery or the sci-fi or, the Court of Thorns and Roses, which my niece loves. That is fine. So maybe it's not their thing. It's also maybe not the right time. My nephew was a huge reader, and I would get him books for Christmas and his birthday all the time. My niece just graduated from college in the spring. She only within the last 2 years really became a reader. So maybe it's just, again, not the right book, not the right time. And then I will say, don't discount the impact of the pandemic. I've been a reader my whole life, and I'm kind of only getting back into it now. I will say I also moved twice during the pandemic, so definitely don't recommend that. Really disrupt your whole life. But being able to lose yourself in a book, I think, is hard when there's these other things drawing your attention, or there's just a lot going on in the world. Maybe I'm worried about next month, November.
We all are.
Indeed.
Before we wrap, Betsy wants to make a quick announcement, and then I'll come up to the front.
Good evening. On Monday at the Daniel Boone Library at 6:30, Abortion Action is going to be doing a candidate forum. What they're doing is they're focusing on the Senate District 15. Joe Peerless will be there. And many of the House candidates like Jacqueline Cotton and Josh Thaxton, Colin, they'll all be there as part of the forum. And I believe that Ray Hartman and Lott Gross also have agreed to be a part of the forum. So just want to invite everyone to come. It's 6:30 on Monday night.
Okay.
Daniel Boone Library.
Jennifer, this was great. And so we have to just keep fighting back, and we have to get new people elected.
Yes. The state part is huge.
The state part is us. So what else can I say? But thank you for coming all the way down here. You got to drive all the way back to St. Louis. So it's all good. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for coming out.
Remember, the live feed from tonight is recorded, and it'll be on the YouTube in the morning. The YouTube. So you can share it that way.
Oh, look at that. Oh, I love you.